Alrighty, so you're starting your professional year 3 right now, and this is a very, very critical year, especially if you're planning on applying to medical school at the end of this academic year. And to do so, then that would ultimately result in your matriculation at the completion of pharmacy school, and that's what the ultimate goal is at this point in time. Granted, if you're maybe you're not ready for that particular stage and you don't want to rush your application, of course you can consider delaying some of these features, but this is pretty much you setting yourself up for the ultimate application that you are going to apply and planning on applying this cycle right now. So for you, leading up at the end of your P3 year, you're going to be fully committed to going to medical school, with your whole application. So this is a good opportunity to have a second MCAT attempt. Now, this is obviously the case if your first MCAT doesn't go well. I ended up taking my MCAT, like I've mentioned, in the spring semester of my P3 year, and that was terrible. So I definitely do not recommend you wait till that long. It was very stressful and it was a last-minute attempt. So we're going to assume that you kind of handled the business the first time around because you listened to some of my lectures already, and so you handled it from your P2 into your P3 year. So the benefit of that is because now your MCAT is taken care of and handled, you now have time to basically commit yourself to broadening and improving your application while focusing on pharmacy school and finishing out your didactic portion of pharmacy school. So this is a good opportunity to start considering letters of recommendation, which are essential to a strong medical school application. Generally speaking, I recommend the first semester of P3 year, you don't really need to worry too much. You can start just brainstorming the people you're looking for. But then the second semester, especially at the start, you need to make sure all your letters are in by, May, June, when your application's ready to go. And so having a good idea of who your letter writers are going to be and then asking them early in the spring semester is going to be essential to making sure that the letters are delivered on time. In the fall, I recommend you kind of brainstorm, like I said, and then in the spring you actually commit. And we'll have a whole discussion about how to actually do this and what, you need to recommend to your letter writers to make sure that they actually fill out the letters correctly and appropriately. So generally speaking, you're going to need a physician letter, an MD or a DO letter. DO letters are very important, especially if you're going to be applying as an osteopathic medical student. So we'll cover that more in the future as well. You also might need a faculty, and particularly an undergrad or graduate level faculty member. Usually that's school specific, so they'll just request that you have X amount of undergrad letters and X amount of graduate and so on. So we'll cover that more in future lectures as well, but those are important things to consider in your P3 year. You're also going to draft your personal statement and work activities for AMCAS. And so a lot of the thing that I stress in this course is pre-writing, and it'll save you a lot of time and guarantee that your application actually is approved and sent out and verified at an appropriate time interval, because as you know, medical school is rolling admissions, so first come first served basis goes a long way. So making sure that you're well organized and have all your content ready to submit into the application is going to be very, very important. Drafting your personal statement, the PS there is very important. That's kind of like your constitution of, why do you want to go to medical school? Who are you as a person? Why is this career so important to you? And we have a whole lecture on personal statements and whatnot. Work and activities is basically your opportunity to share a bunch of clinical experiences or important, significant events that kind of add to your overall persona. So that would be like, work experience, shadowing experience, research outcomes, stuff along those lines there. Medical mission trip would be one of them as well. Additionally, you're in your P3 year and you have API rotations on the horizon. So I think that's also an important thing to talk about now because for myself, I wasn't really sure how they would fit into the medical school application process. I was under the impression that a lot of my API rotations would fall into the AMCAS application where I could just use all of the experiences and put them into the application itself. Unfortunately, the general recommendation is that you're not supposed to put things on your API or into your AMCAS unless you've actually completed them. So, if I'm submitting my application to medical school in, as early as I guess like July and getting it to medical schools, then I might not have even finished more than one single API rotation at that time point. So, the outcome for me was that I ended up signing up for a ton of really challenging API rotations under the guise that they were going to help me out with my application. Now, granted, you can share those experiences in update letters and things down the line, but it wasn't something that was initially seen in my as part of my application as a whole. So yeah, like for instance, I took some very challenging like mini residency level rotations because I thought it would give me more experience and cool things to talk about. I ended up going to like Johns Hopkins for rotation. I was at Cleveland Clinic for rotation, all of which were very challenging rotations and had long hours, and it wasn't really anything that I could add to my application other than update letters down the line, which I did. But so my general recommendation to you is, don't overburden yourself thinking that you need to do really crazy rotations to help, further your application and make yourself sound a little bit, better along those lines. Yeah, sure, if you're doing an API rotation because you're genuinely interested in it, or it's something you want to work on to maybe improve your pharmaceutical skills, 100% take that. But if you're using them for clout purposes, I would recommend you stay away from that option. So yeah, like I said, most of them don't count. And then the final thing is off-block timing, and that's super important because generally speaking, I'm not sure how many off-blocks you'll have at your particular pharmacy institution, but you can put them in pretty convenient places. So the first one I recommend is basically taking your first API rotation off. And the benefit of that is it allows you to apply to medical school pretty much uninhibited in the sense that you can really fine-tune your application, make sure everything's ready to go. And this is all highly dependent on how much you've pre-written your personal statement and work activities. Now, let's say like you haven't, this would be a great opportunity to basically have that month off where you can crank out a lot of content. Alternatively, you can take it maybe on your second block, and then you'll have time to write out secondaries and spend the whole month just writing secondaries. It's not ideal, but it's sure better than doing secondaries and writing your primary while currently on a very challenging rotation. So that's something to keep in mind. Alternatively, you could also save one of the off blocks for maybe interview season, depending, and you can kind of gauge when you're going to generally get interviews based off of how competitive of an applicant you are. So, for instance, if you're like a very strong applicant, you could probably anticipate maybe some earlier interviews like September, October, November, versus maybe if you're a weaker applicant, you kind of put them towards the back end of the open interview stage. Additionally, it's important to think about a budget. Pick up a few extra pharmacy internships here and there to kind of start saving up because like I've already demonstrated, applying to medical school is very expensive. So it's important that you don't have to worry about the financial constraints at that time. Maybe take out a few extra $1,000 in loans just to kind of make sure you're not sitting there penny pinching when you really need to pump out another medical school application, or you need to add a few extra schools to make sure you don't fall behind or something along those lines. So you don't want to deal with the stress of that. So definitely budget and make sure you have the appropriate funds. This is also a time to consider early decision. We have a whole lecture on early decision itself, so I won't dive into it too much here. But essentially, that's just like an early commitment to a medical school. So you only submit one singular application to one medical school. It's basically putting all your eggs in a single basket and hoping that school kind of gives you the blessing that you are going to attend that school. It can be disastrous if it doesn't work out, and we'll cover that more in the future. But something to keep in mind, are you going to apply broadly or are you going to do early decision? And then finally, this is when you obviously complete your AMCAS application, which we were talking about already when you're drafting your personal statement and work activities. That's essentially doing the same thing, but just not inputting it into the physical system or the website. And we'll cover a complete tutorial on AMCAS in Chapter 4 and then secondaries in Chapter 5. And that concludes PY3.